Step into history with the tragic tale of Big Mary, the elephant, a circus spectacle remembered through time. In the early decades of the 20th century, the circus was both a marvel and a macabre mirror of society, a place where wonders from exotic lands mingled with practices we now recognize as cruel. Among the marquee attractions was Big Mary, a 5-ton Asian elephant whose life, like a tragic farce, ended in a manner so absurd and heart-wrenching that it continues to baffle modern audiences. While Mary was once billed as the largest living land animal on Earth and adored for her astonishing tricks, her story reveals a grim reality: the plight of a sentient being caught between the forces of public spectacle and profit. An elephantine star with a sensitive soul. Born around 1894 in Asia, Mary was brought into the fold of Sparks' world-famous show Circus at a young age. Despite her towering physical presence, her imposing form once seen as a marvel of natural engineering, Mary's life in captivity was marked by constant strain, physical punishment, and the emotional toll of separation from her family. Although circus posters and managers' boasts claimed that her tough, leathery hide rendered her almost impervious to pain, modern science tells us otherwise. Recent research into elephant physiology shows that while these animals do possess dense, durable skin, it is interlaced with a multitude of nerve endings and mechanoreceptors that make them acutely sensitive to discomfort and injury. In other words, the notion that a pus-filled scab is nothing more than a minor nuisance to an elephant is a gross oversimplification, a tragic misunderstanding that would have contributed to Mary's daily agony. The fateful day, when a moment of pain became a public catastrophe. Circus life in those days was a relentless cycle of travel, performance, and harsh discipline. Mary's routine was punctuated by demonstrations meant to delight crowds, playing musical instruments, mimicking human sports like baseball, and even performing acrobatics. However, behind the dazzling acts lurked a grim reality. To keep the show running and the audience laughing, handlers employed tools such as bullhooks and chains to control these magnificent creatures. On September 11, 1916, a tragic twist of fate occurred in Kingsport, Tennessee. Walter "Red" Eldridge, a newly hired and evidently inexperienced elephant keeper, was tasked with leading Mary during the daily parade. By all accounts, Eldridge was not well trained in the delicate art of pachyderm management. When Mary, likely suffering from a severe tooth abscess that had rendered her especially irritable, spotted a discarded piece of watermelon rind on the ground, her instinct to nibble was met not with gentle guidance, but with a harsh prod from Eldridge's bullhook. In that moment, Mary's pent-up pain and stress found a trigger. Rather than a calculated act of aggression, her reaction was an instinctive, tragic outburst, a desperate attempt by a sentient creature to relieve her suffering. With a force that belied her gentle nature, Mary's trunk lashed out. In a horrifying cascade of events, reminiscent of a dark slapstick routine gone horribly wrong, she scooped up the hapless keeper, flinging him against a nearby stand. What followed was a scene so brutal that eyewitnesses later described it with a mix of horror and incredulity. Eldridge's fall, compounded by the immense weight of an agitated elephant, resulted in injuries that would prove fatal almost immediately. The circus's dilemma, public outcry, and a grisly decision. News of Eldridge's death spread like wildfire, amplified by sensationalist newspaper headlines and the lurid tastes of a public hungry for a spectacle. The circus, already teetering on the edge of financial ruin in a climate of growing scrutiny over animal welfare, though welfare was hardly a consideration in those days, faced an impossible choice. How does one deal with a beloved, and now murderous, star? For Charlie Sparks, the circus owner, the decision was not rooted in malice toward Mary herself. After all, he had raised her from infancy, but in the cold calculus of profit, reputation, and public safety. Officials in nearby towns began clamoring for drastic measures. Rumors swirled that if Mary were allowed to continue performing, more lives might be imperiled, and the circus's financial prospects would vanish faster than a poorly executed trapeze act. In a decision that today smacks of cruelty and bureaucratic callousness, Sparks resolved that the only expedient solution was to execute Mary publicly. This decision, as grim as it sounds, was rationalized by contemporary circus managers as a necessary public safety measure, a dark punchline to an already tragic situation. As one might muse with bitter humor in a modern boardroom, when your star performer turns into a star in a homicide report, you have little choice but to cut your losses, preferably before social media memes make you the laughingstock of history. The execution, a spectacle of misguided justice. Mary's execution was to be as much a performance as the shows she had once starred in, though the performance here was one of macabre cruelty. On the foggy afternoon of September 13, 1916, Mary was loaded onto a train and transported to the rail yards in Erwin, Tennessee, a town whose grim claim to fame would forever be entwined with her name. There, in front of a crowd that numbered in the thousands, including wide-eyed children and horrified onlookers, a heavy industrial derrick was brought out. The method of execution was as bizarre as it was brutal. Mary was to be hanged by her neck from a chain attached to the derrick, a contraption designed more for the loading of heavy freight than for the humane termination of a living creature. The process unfolded with all the grim theatrics of a sideshow. Mary, already in a state of severe distress from the earlier incident and possibly from her untreated dental pain, was shackled. Eyewitnesses later recalled that as the derrick began to lift her, a loud, ominous crack echoed across the yard, a sound that suggested not the somber toll of finality, but the grotesque snapping of metal and, tragically, bone. For a brief moment, the chain broke, and Mary was allowed a brief, calamitous fall that only deepened the injuries to her already suffering body. Yet, in an effort that today would be met with disbelief and outrage, the circus workers hastily reattached a heavier chain and attempted the hanging once more. With grim determination and a disturbing lack of empathy, they hoisted her up a second time. This time, the chain held, and Mary's massive body was suspended in the cold, damp air as the crowd, ranging from mournful onlookers to bloodthirsty spectators, chanted in a discordant mixture of triumph and terror. For nearly 30 minutes, Mary swung limply, a living monument to a system that prized profit and spectacle over compassion. Her final moments were not marked by the dignity one might hope for in death, but by a grotesque dance of anguish as her body convulsed under the weight of cruelty. When the executioners finally released her and she collapsed to the ground with a final resonant thud, the crowd erupted in a mix of cheers, gasps, and a disbelieving silence that spoke to the unspoken horror of what had transpired. Scientific insights and the cost of ignorance. Modern scientific understanding allows us to look back on Mary's fate with a clarity that her contemporaries lacked. Elephants, despite their imposing size and seemingly impervious skin, are highly social and emotionally complex creatures. Studies in animal behavior and neurology have shown that elephants possess a rich tapestry of emotions, including grief, empathy, and even self-awareness. Mary's physical and psychological suffering, exacerbated by chronic pain, isolation from her herd, and relentless abuse, would today be recognized as deeply traumatic. The rationale that thick skin renders an animal invulnerable to pain is a fallacy that ignores the intricate biology of nerve receptors and the emotional intelligence inherent in these majestic creatures. In truth, Mary's physical agony was likely compounded by emotional distress, a fact that modern veterinary science and animal welfare advocates would regard as utterly unacceptable. The cruelty inflicted upon her, including the use of restrictive chains, the harsh handling with bullhooks, and the final public execution, stands as a grim testament to an era that saw animals not as sentient beings, but as mere instruments of entertainment. A legacy of irony and dark humor. Today, Mary's story is revisited not only as a cautionary tale of historical cruelty, but also as an ironic commentary on the extremes of human behavior. Imagine, if you will, a scenario in our modern era: a viral video, trending hashtags, and a torrent of memes lamenting the absurdity of a circus that once hanged an elephant. The idea that a creature as magnificent as Mary could be reduced to a spectacle of horror is so bizarre, and so darkly humorous in its sheer absurdity, that it challenges our understanding of progress. Modern animal rights groups, veterinarians, and even historians now look upon Mary's execution with a mixture of sorrow and incredulity. It's as if the circus management thought, why not add a little extra drama to our revenue stream? One contemporary critic might quip, blending sarcasm with genuine outrage. Yet, beneath the veneer of irony lies a sobering truth. Mary's fate is a reminder of how far society has come and how far we still must go in recognizing and respecting the sentience of all creatures. The elephant who haunts a town's memory. In the aftermath of Mary's execution, Erwin, Tennessee, earned a grim reputation as the town that hanged an elephant. Over the ensuing decades, the story of Mary has been passed down through local folklore, recorded in newspapers, and revisited in documentaries and scholarly research. For many residents, the memory of that day is a painful reminder of a time when cruelty was not only tolerated, but celebrated as public entertainment. Yet, in an ironic twist of redemption, modern initiatives in Irwin have sought to transform this dark legacy into one of healing and education. Community groups and animal sanctuaries now hold events that both memorialize Mary's suffering and raise awareness about the importance of animal welfare. In a manner that might have once seemed unimaginable, the very spectacle that once drew crowds for its brutality now serves as a catalyst for compassion and reform. Reflecting on history with a dash of wit. It is easy, from our modern vantage point, to view the public execution of Big Mary as an absurd and tragic relic of the past, a dark chapter in the annals of circus history that defies logic and decency. And yet, the irony of it all is not lost on those who study the event today. Imagine a scenario in which the circus owner, faced with the dilemma of a murderous elephant, instead opts for a public hanging, an act that would be unthinkable in a world where animal rights are championed and cruelty is condemned. One might muse, with a wry smile, that if Mary were alive today, her last Instagram post might read, #no more chains, #not just tough skin, #feel me pain. This blend of gallows humor and bitter truth underscores the universality of Mary's story. It is a narrative that transcends time, a reminder that behind every sensational headline and shocking spectacle lies a deeper commentary on the human condition. In Mary's case, the tragedy is not solely in her death, but in the profound misjudgment of a society that failed to recognize the intrinsic worth of a being capable of deep emotion and suffering. Conclusion: a lesson in compassion and progress. The tale of Big Mary remains one of the most extraordinary and sorrowful episodes in circus lore. It is a story of a magnificent creature whose life was marred by exploitation, misunderstanding, and the callous pursuit of profit. Mary's hanging, executed in a manner as theatrical as it was horrific, stands as a grim reminder of an era when entertainment was built on the backs of suffering animals. Yet, even in the depths of this historical tragedy, there is room for reflection, reform, and a touch of ironic humor. Mary's legacy challenges us to reconsider our attitudes toward animal welfare, to question the ethics of spectacle, and to strive for a world where no creature's pain is trivialized by outdated beliefs about toughness or utility. Today, as communities work to honor Mary's memory through educational programs and sanctuaries that provide refuge for elephants, we are reminded that progress is measured not by the spectacle we create, but by the compassion we show. And while we may chuckle at the absurdity of a bygone era, a time when an elephant was hanged for being too dangerous, that laughter is tinged with sorrow and a resolute determination to ensure that such cruelty is never repeated. In the end, Big Mary's story is not merely a dark chapter of circus history. It is a universal parable about the cost of ignorance, the misinterpretation of nature's resilience, and the enduring need for empathy, even when faced with the most colossal of creatures. May her tragic tale serve as both a cautionary note and a call to action. For every life, no matter how massive, deserves dignity, care, and the gentle understanding of our shared humanity.